So just wanted to tell everyone, thank you so much for coming out to our webinar today and tuning in. We have our speaker here today is Phillip Long. You probably all have heard of him from Business Information Solutions. And he's going to discuss with you what every business owner must have in place now to guarantee a fast, easy, and painless recovery of their data after a disaster. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Phillip, and I'll be in the chat section if y'all have any questions. Just type them in there and we'll respond back. So, Phillip?
All right, great. Again, thanks everybody for coming out. We're going to try to make this very informative and use our time very wisely. You got to love technology. I'm actually in Los Angeles, California doing this, and Christy's in North Carolina. So technology is a great thing. So today we're going to talk about really disaster recovery. And what I want to talk about more than just disaster recovery or backup, I want us to kind of shift our thinking into restoration and business continuity, the continuing of business, because just actually at the conference I'm at a cloud conference out here, and I wrote down a couple of facts that I just wrote down, but 55% of SMB downtime is caused by hardware failure. And the cost of downtime is enormous to businesses, and it's really all about keeping the system up and keeping it going. Of course, we are, Business Technology Group is kind of an entity that is a kind of an amalgam, and we're the only company in the market that is able to do, consulting work, marketing work, of course, IT work, and that's kind of the realm we're going to speak on today, and office equipment. We're an authorized Kia, Sierra, and Canon dealer, so we can really take a company and be able to provide the direction as well as the actual tools, and no finger pointing, because it all can be done under one roof. Another thing that's kind of different about us is that we have what's called BIS University, and our goal really as a company is to be thought leaders in the market and to be able to do education and understanding of people, and that's kind of where our cyber webinar series comes from, is kind of through that vein of BIS University. Most folks know who I am already. I've been in business for actually over 16 years now in the IT industry, and we have a large clientele all the way from Biloxi and probably even further up the state of ways to Auburn. Of course, my marketing person put that in because she's from Auburn, but we do have clients there as well, and over into Pensacola and Cantonment area as well. I'm currently the owner of part owner in all of those businesses, and also do real estate here in this market. Today we're going to cover some common misunderstandings that most business owners have about their current backup system. Most people, they have these concepts or these ideas about their backup, and I want to make sure that what people believe they are confirming that it is actually happening. Also, a two-step backup system that you've got to have in place to be 100% certain your business is back up and running and fast. Because again, like I said earlier, most of the cost of an incident, most of the time it's going to be hardware failure, and the cost of that downtime is enormous. And then really the only surefire way to know if your backup is being, your data is being backed up, and how cloud computing can actually make it easy for you and your staff to access your data from anywhere while providing automatic data backup and business continuity. And that's really, again, business continuity is what we want to think about. We want to think about how do we, how long can I be without my data, and when was the last time it was backed up. And what we're really going to talk about is we don't want people to be sitting ducks, to be naive whenever a disaster or something happens that can actually affect and everything that we work so hard to do. There's actually, it's really pretty surprising reasons for data loss. 44% is what this stat says. I just heard in the convention here that it's 55% now. So these stats change a little bit, but basically 44% of system are hardware failure. 32% is human errors. Uh-oh, I didn't mean to delete that. I overwrote that file, whatever. 14% software corruption. 7%, this is a little bit of an older stat because that's actually on the rise quickly with the new variant of a bug called CryptoLocker that encrypts files. There is some data getting lost because of that. And then only 3% is natural disasters. Now, of course, most of us live on the coast, and we think immediately of a hurricane. But I would suspect, and I don't have data to back it up, but very little data is probably lost in hurricanes in our market because we know that they're coming literally a week or more in advance, and we can make some determinations. More than likely, it's going to be a server crashing or pipe busting or something along those lines. Somebody deleted a file that was needed, or a file got really corrupted somehow. Those are the things that we see most often. And 31% of it is absolutely out of the hands of the user's control. And there's, at the end of the day, that leaves a lot of room for improvement. Another aspect that's important to understand is what is data worth. And these are just some basic numbers here about what data is actually worth and why people want it. I mean, that's kind of one of the bigger drivers in the game. A record here, one of them that's not here that is kind of a new stat, is that a healthcare record like the chart, your patient chart, is worth about $50. That's the number one thing that is getting breached these days. But regardless, if people can still, bank accounts, they can still credit card information, your social media and gaming things, which are very powerful because if they can represent you, they can spread their malware and their data stealing tools easily because they're basically doing it based upon your sphere of influence with the people that you know. They're taking your account and they're hijacking it and they're spreading it. And in the past we've seen some really stupid emails and things that happen. But now they're really getting a lot more sophisticated, and they are able to actually, they're a lot more effective in getting you to click on something inside of an email. And again, I hear people say all the time, well, I won't open email unless I know who it's from. Well, if their email account gets hacked, then that's a great way to infect people. So those are major reasons why, because our data is really worth something. This is a very simple formula that I use to show how much downtime costs a company. Basically, if you take a median employee salary and you multiply it by about 1.5, and I do that because by the time you finish with a person, not only do you have the employee's salary, but you have 401k, health insurance, FICA taxes, you've got electricity, office space, equipment, training, all the things that go into the cost of an employee. And the stat is usually about, this is actually on the low end, but I've made adjustments because of the market that we're in. It's a little cheaper down here. But it's cost you, if you have a $40,000 employee, they really probably cost you about $60,000. And if you divide that by the total number of hours in that's 2,080 is in a work year. That's 52 weeks at 40 hours. And then if you multiply that by the number of employees affected, plus the top line revenue times your profit margin. Let's say you're making $2 million a year and you're making 10% margin on that, so that's $200,000, and you divide that by that number of hours. And really what we're trying to arrive at here is what is the cost per hour. So I'm going to quickly just do the math right here while I'm on the phone with you guys. I'm going to say that you've got an average employee that is Get my calculator out here. The average employee, and they're basically, let's just say they're $40,000 a year employee, so they're costing you about $60,000 per year. We're going to divide that by 2,080 hours. So basically that employee is costing about $29 per hour. Okay, let's just say you're a small company, and with that, say you have 20 employees. So basically my cost per downtime is $580 for just my employees. That's just my staff costs. All right, let's just say that same company with 20 employees, let's say that they could generate, let's just use, $3 million a year. That's the top line revenue, and say they're making 10% margin on that. So that's $300,000 a year in profit. And again, if you divide that by 2,080, we're looking at about $145 worth of profit. So in essence, what you're looking at here is, doing the math, about $735 per hour that a company is not able to work. And a lot of times, I own an IT company, a lot of times people don't want to call the IT company to get it fixed because they're like, oh gosh, they bill out at 110, 125 an hour or whatever. But the reality is they're sitting there and they're losing $735 an hour. So the whole game that has been very clearly done these days is managed services, and the whole industry has come about to mitigate downtime, because companies that are in the know understand that downtime is your biggest enemy. And that's not really even including, that's a very rudimentary, that's really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what it really costs you, because there's reputation damage that can happen because you can't service your clients in a timely fashion that can be extremely long-term. Pain comes from that, as well as opportunity cost and other things that factor into that. So let's look at the 4 biggest reasons small businesses lose data. The first reason is they think they have a backup. They think because they have a appendage hanging off of the server, a USB drive, a tape drive, something, they think just because that's there, they're getting a backup. Another way is that they're using the wrong type of backup. They're using maybe the default or standard Windows backup on their server. Terrible product. It doesn't alert. It may or may not work, and you don't know. It doesn't tell you it failed. You have to manually look. And we all know the reality is that it doesn't work. Another thing is you can just hang a USB drive off there, and in a 5-year period, Seagate did a study. In 5-year period, 26.3% of Seagate's hard drives fail within 5 years. So if you're backing up to an external hard drive, and within 5 years, 1 out of 4 of those drives is going to fail. That's a pretty high percentage, and a percentage that you don't want to bet your company on. Again, they never validate. Their trust is in their hope, and that's really not what you're looking for. I had a particular client that was at a church, and this little lady, secretary, she faithfully swapped out a tape for 3 years, and we went in, we looked, and she had not been getting a backup. She had not gotten a backup for 3 years prior, but every day, according to her, and I'm sure she's not lying, she replaced and swapped that tape out, but there was never any data being written to it. It was truly devastating, because it was at Christmas time, and they had a server crash, and they had all of their Christmas program and all this kind of very important files. They had a lot of man hours in, and they simply just did not have it. And another reason is that they don't have a simple IT disaster recovery plan, and they're hoping that the IT guy has got it handled. And as a a kind of the dynamic in corporate America or even in small business America. It kind of cuts in the market that we are talking to now. It cuts two ways. If they do have an IT guy, the guy who runs the place, or the CEO, CFO, or the central manager, they say, "Oh, the IT guy's got it," and does he? Maybe. I don't know, but there really needs to have a plan in place where it's actually being checked and monitored, and the C-level is guys who are involved, whereas a lot of times they're not, and that's all good and fine of whose fault it was, but when the genie's out of the bottle and the data's corrupted or the data's encrypted and the data's lost, that's where we wind up showing up, and it's very, very, very messy, and it's very costly to a company on things that really can be solved quickly. So, but that's okay. I've got my data backed up, you say. Right? Wrong? Do you know? All right. Very important point. The whole point of this whole conversation today is going to be data backup does not equal disaster recovery. Let's just suppose your house burned down, God forbid, and everything is gone, including the structure. But you were smart enough to keep an exact replica of everything you had in your house in a separate warehouse off-site. That's the data backup. So house is burned down, but it's okay. Everything I have, every dish I have, every picture I have, every sofa, everything I got, I have it stored in a warehouse. Okay? However, we can't move back in until you rebuild the house. In networking, really what that means is you got to buy new hardware. You got to rebuild the server. You got to reinstall all the software, and hopefully you have the media and the licensing to do that. Then you have to reinstall the data that has been that's been down, and that whole process takes 2 to 3 days. That's best case scenario. That's buying a server from an outlet store and overnighting it, and it's just messy and it's very expensive, and before we know it, we've lost 3 or 4 days worth of production, and we're not in the spot we want to be. And of course, reconfiguring all your settings, and that's just to have the data back the way it was the last time it was backed up. Well, if you didn't get a good backup the night before, you're rolling back to the night before, and if you're not monitoring it, you ain't had one in weeks, we've got a big loss of data and a lot of stuff to get redone, and that's going to really, really, really hurt us. So data backup does not equal disaster recovery. This is a case study that we did with a lady, this distinguished young woman, Valerie over there, had an issue. It used to be the Junior Miss, the U.S. Junior Miss, and now they're called Distinguished Young Women. Long-standing organization, and she's actually the operations director. And before we got in there, she was using a small 2-man company to back up their data on a daily basis. And she trusted them. And their server crashed one day, and they literally lost years of data. And this is basically the case study. And then what happened was we came in and we realized that the data wasn't actually being backed up. And they had to recreate a lot of those documents. And of course, we know that Murphy's Law says that nothing's going to happen at the most optimal time. It's going to happen at the worst time. And sure enough, it was during their season when they have all these girls from all over the country and they have their pageant in Mobile. So it was enormously stressful on her and her staff. They had a whole bunch of other people, and they were literally working around the clock trying to create all the the pictures and the slide decks and the whole thing to run that program. They didn't have. So it was very, very, very messy. So what we came in is we put a business continuity solution in that gives us reporting. So another client of ours that back in, I don't recall the year, but Big Daddy's Grill out on Fish River, it flooded. They had our backup in, and they had basically 3 or 4 foot of water in the building, like on a Friday, or maybe it was a Wednesday night. I can't remember. But let's just say this flood happened on a Saturday or Sunday. The water rose. They were the building was flooded on Tuesday or Wednesday, and Mr. Newsom called me up and he said, "Philip, we got to get going. We want to be open this Friday." I'm like, "What?" I couldn't believe it. But ultimately, the building, the way it was made, when the water came out, everything was hard surfaced on the walls up 4 foot. So they basically went in and replaced all the plugs and all the data ports. We did, and they had electricians come in and replace all the plugs. They had a disaster recovery. We had them back up and going on that Friday night. Okay, let's kind of look over a minute here on the data backups that are in the market today. Of course, the no backup syndrome is not suitable for any business and backs up, say, only to its own hard drive. And as I said before, in a 5-year period, about 25% of the drives are going to fail. So that's a horrible plan. You know, we have CDs, thumb drives, basic external drives is the kind of the next level up that you see people doing. And that's really only suitable for backing up a few files on a couple of workstations. And the challenge with that is how do you do it automatically? Then, of course, tape drive, and you would be surprised. I think over 50% of the market still uses tape, and they have about a 70% recovery on tape drives. Then, of course, hard drives. In some way, there's some network-attached storage devices and off-site backup only. And once only used for enterprise company, but it's become affordable for mid-sized companies. So that's a big way that a lot of people are doing it, where backing up to the cloud is what you may refer to that as, where the data is just being stored up in the cloud. And then, of course, the best is a server-based network-attached storage with virtualization and off-site backup. This used to be absolutely outside of everyone's budget, but with the way that technology is scaling, it has gotten very affordable. We're going to pick each one of these apart. Of course, the no backup's not even worth talking about. The CD, DVDs, and thumb drives, the pros are it's expensive, really doesn't take a lot of technical expertise to do it, really no hardware investment, and there's a reasonable success rate of recovery on those if it got done. The con on that is that it can only back up a small amount of data. It's completely manual, so therefore it's not likely to be done regularly. It requires users to wait until it complete to take off site. So they have to kick the backup off, and then once it finishes, they got to remember to take it off site. A lot of times that's another failure point. There's no verification on the data, so that you got some files on that thing, but you don't know whether they're readable and restorable or not. There's no way to do what's called a bare metal restore, to where basically you're just backing up files and folders. You're not backing up the whole system. You'd be backing up, say, your My Documents. So it's really not a good solution. Of course, tapes, same kind of way. The thing that is good, you can't back up a lot of data. It's relatively inexpensive, even more, it's less expensive today, actually, than it ever was. The things we don't like about it is, say you have a tape that failed on a server, and it's an older server. Well, somehow I've got to get the tape drive mounted into something, and a lot of times the technology changes. The connectors that connect that old drive is not what's going to be in a new server, so there has to be like a middleware box that we've got to get this tape drive mounted in to see if we can restore those files. And as I said previously, about 70% of those tapes actually restore. A hard drive based system or network attached storage device or an off-site backup only. The good thing about those is that there's no human interaction required. Usually these have systems that fire off at given intervals, and you can back up a lot of data. you can actually restore the entire system. And there's a pretty high rate of success on that type of backup. The bad part is that there is a good bit of cost in investing in the hardware and the software, and there's a level of technical expertise required for installation and maintenance, because somebody's got to watch to make sure that thing is working. It has to alert to someone, and someone has to be there to watch it. And it may or may not have offsite capabilities to be able to, and it may take a long time to retrieve that. If you back something up in the cloud, say with Mozy or Carbonite, it could literally take weeks to re-download it. And they're very difficult to deal with, to get support on. They don't have a lot of bandwidth, so it could be really, it's not something that would be good for a business. All right, now this is really where we are as a company, and this is what we would say would be, the best. And the pro is on this, where you have a server-based system, which is basically a server that is on site next to your server. It's on premise, and it also has cloud-based server. It also has a cloud-based image stored in the cloud. So really, we have the best of both worlds. And the pro is that there's no human interaction required. We can back up a lot of data. You can do a bare metal restore on dissimilar hardware. It allows truly for a disaster recovery plan, because it has all the pieces needed, and then it's really going to have the best success rate. And the cons are technical expertise required to install and maintenance. There's a monthly investment required, and not all devices have ability to check the data is another thing, that certain ones of these, if you don't pick the right one, has the capability to actually do what's called a CDC, or a redundancy check, and it's a way that it can actually look at the data that's being backed up to make sure that the files are not only backed up, but they're restorable, not corrupted in any way. So really, here's how a particular solution that we do that is really the way for people who, when I meet with people and they're like, yeah, there's no way I could be without my data, or another story I get is, yeah, I could be without my data, but not on payroll week, or not on payroll day. And Murphy's Law says that don't worry, no matter what, your server will break on payroll day. So with this solution, basically you have there, you can see that we have our production servers. And then there's an appliance that we store on site there too. And with some software, we actually can take that image that has all of the users' data on it, the production servers on it, and it stores it locally on this, it's really a server, a BDR appliance. And in the event, and then it also takes an image and it stores it into the cloud. So let's just kind of walk through a basic scenario. Let's just say that the server blows up, or let's just say files get corrupted. Well, right there we have the backup on our BDR appliance. We can restore files in a matter of minutes. And we can also schedule how often that BDR appliance receives an image from the production environment. So we could do every 2 hours. We could actually have it to where it syncs over on this other box, so that if we corrupt some files, it would be a maximum of, say, 2 hours, or even an hour we can do it. And so we can actually just mount files, pull them down, and restore them very rapidly. We're talking probably the whole process is 15 to 30 minutes. Or let's say that the production server totally goes out and just will not boot. You can actually start that same image up on that BDR appliance, and it'll run on that box until we can have time to get your production server fixed. So minimum downtime takes about 15 minutes to start that virtual server up. So very short window of downtime. Well, let's just say a tornado comes through, or a water pipe busts, or a fire happens, or somebody breaks in and steals the production servers and the BDR appliance. Well, in that case, you actually, within 4 hours, we can take that image that's in the storage cloud and move it down to the continuity cloud and give you remote access to it in a maximum of 4 hours. So in this way, this is a true business continuity solution and not a simple file and folder backup. So here are basically the steps that it takes to have a fast recovery. Is you got to plan it out. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? Isn't that what that's what John Wooden said. So here's some questions that you ask during the planning phase. Will you back up every PC or just the server? A lot of times the way we set it up, we're going to catch the PC data in the data set. Okay, and then how will you access the internet or have phone calls handled? What's going to happen if you have a real disaster? How's your incoming communication? And what is the exact process to restore your data? What do you do? Do I click here, do that, call this person? Who's responsible? And what will you do in the event of your backup drive does not work? That's the thing that you got to think about. And then, of course, with the backup, we want to perform daily backups, minimum, sometimes multiple times a day for some clients. You got to take that that media offsite somehow. Can't be stored in the cloud. I mean, your car for a lot of reasons. Bad on the equipment, and it's just really not that good. And then we got to have a second backup option, such as an automated remote backup that's being stored in the cloud. And then we got to have somebody review the logs of your backup program daily. Some backup programs can email you with backup status, and you cannot ignore the servers and think that they're just going to go away. You got to stop and you got to fix them. And then occasionally you got to restore a sample of your data on a scheduled basis. Monthly for a hard drive based backup, more frequently for tapes. You got to do fire drills once a year. Okay, what happened? What are we going to do? I want to make sure that if my building just burned down, I need to get that spun up in the cloud. I need to go through these steps in the event that a disaster actually happened. Okay, so really the question here on everybody's mind, how can you set up your backup system, fix now, and have the peace of mind that you could be back up and running fast in the event of a disaster? And that really needs to be the question on every business owner's mind. Is the former Intel CEO, he said that disaster is going to happen, we just don't know when, and only the paranoid are going to decide. So there needs to be a bit of skepticism and paranoia as it relates to your data, because it is probably the most valuable asset within a company. And here's what we recommend. You want an on-site and an off-site backup. You want to create an image of your server and any critical PCs or data that's on those PCs. And an image is much different than just the files and folders. This is an entire ecosystem of a server, not just certain folders. And that ecosystem actually can be restored to another box, even what we call dissimilar hardware, meaning that you don't have your main server is gone. It won't boot ever. It's burned up my fire. I want to take that back up and just restore it immediately right onto a brand new piece of hardware. Then you got to have somebody to monitor the backups. You got to do monthly validation and test restores. You got to have somebody that will go in there and test a couple of files just to make sure everything is up and working. And so it brings me to announcing this Failsafe Ultimate Backup and Business Continuity Solution. We call it BIS Data Guard. It's going to meet all of those challenges that we have, and it's going to take the pressure off of the business owner in having to monitor it and do all that testing and make sure that it works. It's fully automated backup. It's going to free the staff of rotating tapes, monitoring the backups, or even worrying about if the data is safe. It'll even back up open files. I'm sure some people on the call remember that, oh God, you forgot to close down the accounting application, and therefore it didn't back up. You can restore a file in 3 minutes instead of 30 minutes like other backup systems. Very quick to go in and grab those files. There's a daily verification of your backup and monthly test restores. And they're going to give you peace of mind that your files can actually be done. We're actually doing weekly restores on the newest version of this solution, where it automatically logs in and it restores a couple of files, and it sends you the screenshot to show you that the system was up and working. It's monitored 24/7, 365, and it does overnight disaster recovery. It's actually during normal business hours from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's a 24-hour restore if it happens at night, but actually we can spin that up in that continuity cloud within 4 hours in a business day. Another kind of product we want to talk about is another way that people are kind of sharing files, and I'm sure everyone's heard of the product called Dropbox, and really the risks that are associated with that. And with that risk, there's a lot of corruption of data that happens within Dropbox. It's a consumer-grade product. There's also been a big bunch of data theft. Also, it does not meet, they won't sign, doesn't meet PCI and HIPAA requirements. They won't sign a business associate agreement because of the way that they actually store the files. Their whole ecosystem is not set up in a way that had security in mind, because it's really a bit dated. There's also a lot of files that can be lost. There's total loss of accountability, which I think is actually the biggest threat. No one would let somebody come in and take copies of their files and say, I'm going to store them at my home office, because that's not good business. What if they quit? Who else has access to those files whenever they're out of my possession? A lot of lawsuits have come from this. A lot of data losses come from this. This is another product that we've probably had this out for about 1.5 years now, and this is actually an enterprise level file sync share application that is secure. We can access 100% of your data from anywhere on any device. It also has what we call team shares that will allow us to collaborate with colleagues, clients, and business partners. Again, this slide deck just magically shows up in a folder that my marketing director and I has, and I have access to it. So it really makes for a lot better environment. And even if you're emailing, a lot of people are emailing sensitive documents where if they had a team share within the company, that data would never leave the organization. That's huge because by default, email is unencrypted. And if somebody can get in the middle of that traffic, they can actually steal your email. So in this world, there is no real risk, because the data never leaves and goes over an unsecure connection. There's also, this particular product meets HIPAA, FINRA, SARBOX, meets all of the goals of the security folks, as well as it has the ability to remote wipe. Say you lost your laptop or you lost your cell phone, you can actually remote wipe it in a matter of 10 seconds. That data's gone and off that machine. Of course, it's HIPAA compliant, Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI, FINRA. It meets all of those goals. So really, the determination is how do I determine if a fail-safe backup is right for you? Well, we have a real easy way to determine. We'll help you. And we're not there to sell you something. We want to go over, basically ask some questions that will define kind of that planning stage that drives the conversation to know what it is. We'll do a free backup and security audit if you just email me. after this, I'll schedule that up. And with that, there's a 57-point assessment of your current backup system, security, antivirus, and network. And we throw that antivirus and network audit in because the reality is backup actually falls into the bracket of security. And even more so with that new bug out called CryptoLocker or ransomware, where they actually encrypt your files. So you really, in order to have a great backup, you need to have what's called an air gap. And I don't want to get too technical, but all that means is if your system is set up in a way to where you got that ransomware bug that encrypts files and your backup files are on the network and can be touched by the machine that's infected, it will actually encrypt your backup. And you'll be in a really bad state because not only is your primary files encrypted, but your backup files will be. So it's called an air gap in our industry, where you want to have a space, and we'll talk about that during this assessment. We'll look at the backups and the disaster recovery plan that you currently have. We'll also look at a discovery of what data you have. Is that file on your laptop really getting backed up? That's important because a lot of times people store things locally on their computer in their C drive. And 625,000 laptops get stolen from airports every year. That's where an enormous amount, even with HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, 40% of data that gets lost in mobile type devices, tablets, PCs, laptops, cell phones, things that are mobile. We'll also do a cost analysis of what you're currently spending on your backup and storage, so we can make sure that this, does it make sense for you? We don't want to do anything that's not good for you. And then we'll do a security testing and review. We'll look at speed and optimal performance analysis and do a review of your network documentation. So basically, we're going to come out and take a look, and so that when we're done, you'll know a couple of things. You'll know, one is, am I geared up for success? And if not, here's where my gears are grinding or where I'm stuck. And so that, if you have your own IT guys or if you have whatever, we'll happily turn all that information over and, aid in the solution or not aid in the solution, make a recommendation or not make a recommendation, really based on where the client sits and what their needs are. So what do we do now? If you go to this website, askbis.com/webinar survey, and if you fill out that survey, there's absolutely no obligation, no heavy sales pressure, no guilt to hire us or buy the solution. So if you, I'll leave that up for just a second more so people can go to it. And I guess for now we're going to go to questions, and I'm going to see, Christy, do we have any questions?
We do. We had a few that came in through email, and one of the questions was, does the recovery plan that we laid out meet compliance objectives like Sarbanes-Oxley and HIPAA?
Absolutely, yeah. The one that that we will do, it'll actually exceed Sarbox and HIPAA in some areas. So absolutely 100%. The software that we use is compliant, and the data before, here's the beauty, and I spoke of that air gap, and I said I wasn't going to get technical, and now I'm going to lie and get a little technical, but I'm going to try to keep it on the top level. Basically, what happens on a good backup, and that's why you don't want to use just some of these cheap backups, because they don't encrypt the files, which would be a violation of HIPAA and Sarbox, is where basically we take this data, and as it's imaging it from the original source, like the server, let's just say, it actually is encrypting it with AES 256-bit encryption, which is, that's the industry standard. Anything that says it's got a certified encryption on it, they're using that type of technology. Very standard, very good. So much so that if you know anything like about WikiLeaks and the data that the guy stole and he basically passed out to everyone, that data is all over the world, but no one can open it because of the encryption. It's AES 256-bit encryption. So it uses that type of technology before it ever gets stored somewhere else. And then when it leaves the say the backup server on site, or the BDR appliance as we call it, it is already encrypted, and when it goes to be stored in the cloud, it's encrypted. Even so much so that the person who's providing the cloud storage space, they have no access to those files. If they had the file itself, it would be absolutely of no use to them. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, we had one more. I believe this person's trying to figure out their recovery time objective. What is a general recovery time objective that would have the lowest amount of downtime costs associated with it that's possible?
Yeah, that's this type of solution that I'm talking about, our BIS Data Guard, in the reasonable realm of small to mid-sized business. Now, there's faster ways of doing this, but what can be afforded, and we're talking, I don't like to talk price without evaluation, but we're not talking about a large sum of money to do a BIS Data Guard, because we live in that small to mid-sized business space to where we have to be able to do solutions that are actually affordable to the client. So let me get to the question, and the question was basically, the conversation that I always have with clients is two-part. Number one, how long can you be without your data? It's kind of like the slide where it was, my house caught on fire, but don't worry, I got everything I have in my house is in a warehouse across town. Well, the problem is I got to build another house so I can move my stuff in it. That's kind of the way most people do backups. They're just backing up their files. And, that's going to take days. At the very best case scenario, it's going to take days to recover from. And you hope that whoever set the backup up, you hope that they were monitoring it, and you hope that they had all the files that you actually need in it. So that's one other part, because, again, you're going through and you're checking boxes saying, yeah, I want my documents backed up, and I want my desktop backed up, and I want the SQL database backed up. But if sometimes programs get updated and files get moved around on the system, and somebody forgets to go back in there and check that box. So that's the one question. The second question is, like, what restore point can I tolerate? Meaning, I back up every night at midnight, okay? So, and the following day, or really I guess the same day, my server crashes at 3 p.m. and we start at work at 7. Well, basically what's at risk is all of the data for that day. That's called a recovery point objective. Where am I going to recover from? What point in time? Well, I'm going to be recovering in from the previous day's business. I'm going to have lost up to one full business day's worth of business. Whereas with the Data Guard, we schedule the replication to happen, and it's the entire server. 100% of the server is backed up. You can't put a file on that server without it getting backed up. So even if somebody misplaces this or that, it's absolutely going to be backed up. And then it's being stored on a box that's right next to it that is local. And again, and then we can do an update to that backup. Depends upon performance. On a standard file server, you could get by. It'll update as often as every 15 minutes. There is a little bit of a performance impact that it takes just seconds for it to actually update. So in a traditional file server environment, you can do it every 15 minutes. There's some other types of servers that have a lot of activity where you don't need to snap it that often, but as quick as 15 minutes. A lot of times we'll set it for 1 hour, 2 hour, but again, that comes from that assessment is where we make those decisions. And from there, in the event that the server breaks, we actually can start that up, and it's gotten way faster even lately. In about 10 minutes, you can have that server completely spun up and started up and working off of. And the beauty of it is it's the exact replica of the original production server, so that you're up and running and nobody knows the difference. You don't have to go in and do any changing. We can do all this remotely just by starting that up. And then say you had to replace your server, you just run off of that box. And of course, we go all the way to the whole building's gone, the house fire happens. We actually have the whole house and the contents stored in the cloud, and we can actually have that turned up in 4 hours, a maximum of 4 hours, and give you remote access to it. So a lot of bang for the buck in this solution, something that was totally out of reach. Even 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the cost has really come down greatly, and the amount of data that you can store has been increased. So that's the beauty of technology, is that over time, it trends, and it's heading towards zero, at some point as they build out the cloud environment and all those things. The costing has come down a lot. Okay. Anything else, Christy?
Yeah, we probably want to unmute the mics and see if anyone on the call, I know we had some emails come in, but see if anyone else has any other questions. So we're unmuting the mics. If anyone has any questions, just shout it out.
Well, surely I didn't do that good a job. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'll flip back. I don't know, I'm getting some feedback. I'm going to mute those mics again.
Muted.
There we go. I'm going to flip back to that one slide deck. If anybody has any questions, they can go ahead and fill out that askbis.com/webinar-survey, and I will be more than happy to help out in any way. And from there, I guess I'll bid my farewell, and y'all have a wonderful week.